What's up, world? It's your boy, Mike Muse, for this episode of the Mike Muse Show. I am super excited to be in conversation with my next guest today. I mean, everyone, you guys are back to school in some way, shape, or form. We never thought that we would get to this level of capacity of in-school classrooms, particularly due to the COVID-19 virus and the Delta variant that is popping up. I've done so many conversations around the importance of classroom instructions and how it's important to the mental health of our students. That goes beyond just the classroom instructions. I've also talked to you about a lot of students who are facing difficult times where they have unfortunately led to taking their own lives. I've mentioned to you numerous times, I had some family friends of mine particularly one individual whose son had two of his friends commit suicide due to just the mental struggle that he was faced with. I've also, as you know, written many articles on the importance of classroom instructions and how that has an impact on Black and Brown children more so adversely than other populations due to the digital divide and all the other reasons. And so it's back to school. Fall is my jam. I love a good pumpkin spice latte. I love a good fall football Saturday. Go Blue, University of Michigan. And so it's time to get back to the year, especially back to school shopping. I used to love going back to school shopping when I was a kid. So I couldn't think of a better person to help me kind of unpack what's happening in the nation. We hear a lot of our government officials who are doing any and everything they can to undermine the education system in terms of what educators feel and believe about masking and importance of it. And so here we have the president of the National Educators Association, which is the largest teacher union in America with over 3 million members. Their president, Ms. Becky Pringle. How are you, Becky?
I am good, Mike. It is so good to be with you today.
I am happy to be with you. So first of all, happy back to school. This is your season. This is your time normally. Talk to me normally about pre-COVID, like what you guys will be doing. What are you most enjoying? What are you anticipating? Like in normal times, what is going on as a president of NAA versus what you're going through right now?
I'm not sure, Mike, what normal is. I don't think any of us knows what that is right now. But let me tell you this. I taught middle level learners the wonders of science for over 30 years. And this is what I know. This school year, this back to school season will be anything but normal. But we have worked so incredibly hard over the spring, the winter, spring, and summer. In the winter, we were fighting to make sure that educators got prioritized for vaccines. In the spring, we fought to make sure that the American Rescue Plan was passed. And over the summer, we worked so hard to have summer learning and enrichment programs, to have extended learning opportunities, to ensure that we employed accelerated learning strategies to not only meet the needs of our students in the middle of this pandemic, but to take a look at how we could diagnose and then close any social, emotional, and academic gaps. Because you're right. I mean, this has been a tough year for all of us, but it's just been especially tough for our students. The uncertainty and the chaos, the isolation, the sadness, the grief, most especially in our Black and Brown and Indigenous communities, where this virus has disproportionately impacted our students and their families, and all the crises it's spawned, right? The economic crisis and healthcare and housing, all of those things happened. And so there was a lot of grieving and there was a lot of loss. And so we have worked really hard to ensure that we had the funds to provide our students with the extra supports and the professionals, mental health professionals, to help them recenter themselves, to help them reintegrate themselves into in-person learning. And to begin this year, I will say this, Mike, there is one thing that doesn't change every year. I feel it too, even though I'm not in classroom right now. I have a 9-year-old. He just turned 9 today. He just turned 9 today. 9-year-old grandson. He's starting 4th grade, and he is so excited. He has his new backpack and sneakers and clothes. And educators are excited to start this new year. So that hasn't changed. They're encouraged and they're hopeful, but they are a bit anxious. because it's
Well,
not about.
happy birthday to your grandson. And I hear all the things you
Yay.
outlined, which is what I wanted to do. But the reason why I asked you that question about what are you guys normally doing right around kickoff school year pre-COVID is because a lot of us are understanding the educational system from a different perspective now. A lot of us, I'm not a parent, but I know what it's like to be a student. And now I'm a person who's engaged in policy discourse across the country. And so now we're doing more of a deep dive into what teachers have to experience. And now we've learned through COVID-19, while having parents having to be essentially the teachers, right, or support the teacher and home learning instructions, just how challenging the demands of the job really is, right? Sometimes we just take that for granted, dropping our child off at 8 a.m., right, or 7:30 a.m. And so I'm just curious, in normal times, pre-COVID, what would you guys be dealing with around this time? Because that only adds on to the compounding experience of everything you just outlined, in addition to what you also too had to do if it wasn't COVID-19. And so this is almost like a teachable moment for our audience, just to understand the magnitude of where we are. But sometimes we can't understand the magnitude of where we are if we don't even have a baseline for what the norm normally is for a back to school kickoff. So can you actually just address that really quickly, if possible?
So we'd normally be setting up our bulletin boards, and we'd normally be deciding on a classroom design. We'd normally be contacting parents and welcoming them to this new school year. We normally be thinking about how we're going to develop those relationships with students, because that's so a core to ensuring that students have a good year, that they have that connection to the adults in that school building. So we'd normally be doing that, and we're still doing that. But you are right. I mean, we've learned a lot over this last year and a half, some of which I had an opportunity to visit with some of our teachers over the last couple of weeks and over the summer. And what they've told me is that there are lots of things they've learned, especially about technology, that they will actually bring forward into this school year. I don't know that we'll ever be back to normal, but it is absolutely essential that we ensure that all of our students have what they need and deserve. So we have to get at some of those systemic inequities that exist in our schools and all the other social systems that are compounding on our students. We have to make sure they have the resources and supports. We have to make sure that we have school nurses and school counselors, especially this year. We have to bring our class sizes down, especially in our more marginalized communities. And we have to make sure that we are supporting each other. Our educators are also feeling the stress and the strain of all they've been through in these last 18 months. Because Mike, you're right. This has been a year like none other. And we appreciate those who now see what we see every year, but we are welcoming not only parents, but others to share the responsibility in the learning of our students. That's what we must do together.
Well, everything you just said again, I think is really good. I'm building a narrative here, right? And so just to understand the baseline of what teachers normally have to go to in response to now add on to what they're doing right now. For me, I don't think I've ever seen teachers have to be involved in, public health. So for example, I'm an engineer by degree, right? And so I work with Google right now on AI, machine learning, and big data. And so we're always talking about like what the machine is learning, what the computer is learning, and have to be adaptive to it. And so I'm also looking at the role of teacher now, just because there has been a patchwork from state to state in terms of policies regarding mask mandates, how school districts should or should not function. But I also do believe now teachers, although you guys are normally around political discussions around budget, right, and direction of curriculum maybe. But now that you guys literally are caught in the middle of partisanship, I feel like you guys are also too caught in the middle of a policy discourse that sometimes isn't rooted in science. And so how has that been on your members to now have to step into the role of being a public health advocate? Also too having to be aware of just policies, and this isn't their official title, but they just now have to be aware of that. And so I'm just wondering how does that have impact on your members?
I'll be honest, Mike, it has been hard. It has been stressful. It has been overwhelming, because we understand more than anyone else, other than parents of our students, how important it is for our students to be safe. they can't learn if they're not healthy. They can't learn if they haven't eaten. They can't learn if they don't feel that support and love around them. And so for educators to be asked to take on so much of this extra responsibility, you saw it happen when the pandemic forced us into virtual learning. You saw not only teachers, but school bus drivers and food service workers, counselors and nurses, all of them working to feed not only our students, but families, working to drive school buses to create hotspots so that they could connect to the internet, trying to make sure that they pass out some. And by the way, Mike, we always had pencils and notebooks and the normal kind of school materials on our list of things that we would buy out of our own pocket. But whoever thought they'd have to put PPE on the list of school supplies? But that's what was happening last school year. It's one of the reasons why we fought so hard for the passage of the American Rescue Plan, because we needed those additional resources, because now we had to be responsible for the safety of students. So it has been overwhelming, and it has had an impact on the stress of our members, and we're particularly concerned that so many educators are making the choice to leave the profession either before they were scheduled to retire. Most especially concerning is our young folks who are leaving, who have just come into the profession. And again, disproportionate numbers of teachers of color are choosing to leave the classroom. So we are working so hard to work with others, to collaborate, so that that stress and strain is not just placed on our educators, that we share that responsibility for our students' success.
Can you characterize a little bit outside of just like, obviously the broad strokes of what you just laid out? Like, what are you hearing from some of those members who like, I'm leaving? Like what are some of like in their postmortems? Like, what are they saying explicitly? I get the broad strokes, and yes, and we all can understand why, but I'm just curious, like what they're saying from the broad perspective. And I'm also too curious, what are like some of the Black and Brown and Indigenous educators saying too for their reasons for leaving?
So we just did a poll, Mike, and it was very discouraging to see the numbers of additional educators who are thinking about retiring early. These are our most experienced educators. They are the ones that are most likely to be mentors to our younger teachers as well. And what they are saying to us is that the stress of the weight of the responsibility is so heavy for them. And I think you probably saw the pendulum shift. So as when we first went out virtually, teachers were heroes and bus drivers were fabulous. And they were saying all of these things. As we realized that we had to shut our schools buildings down to keep our students safe, then they started to vilify our educators and hold them responsible for the pandemic and hold them responsible for keeping students safe. That's a lot. That is a huge weight. And in the midst of all of that, our teachers were holding office hours for their students, but parents were saying, please hold office hours for us too. So they were educating students and parents. They were coming together and collaborating and taking extra courses so they could learn how to best engage their students in a virtual environment. That's a lot. And then they worked over the summer. They wanted to make sure that their students were ready to kick off the fall. So they are exhausted and underappreciated, and they've never been paid a professional salary. And so all of these things weigh heavily on them as they not only teach other people's students, but they're trying to take care of their own families. It is a lot. And we're trying to work with them to create a space for them to talk about that, but also to get them that additional support they need for their own mental health.
Let's get into that a little bit more, because that's something as this conversation is ongoing, meaning our conversation we're having right now, I'm just thinking about all that has to take place before they even get into the classroom, right? And so I talk about it from perspective pre-COVID of advocating for youth, in particular underserved areas where, for example, I live in New York City. I used to be on the board of advisors for a high school in the Bronx, and it was just a normal New York City public school but typical story where 90% receive free lunches. There was a good portion of the population who lived in homeless shelters. And so there was a part of me where I began to understand like all that it took for that particular child just to get to class, to have to go to sleep in a very uncomfortable environment that may be at risk to public safety, having to wake up possibly maybe to an empty stomach and not have any breakfast for them to be fed, on their way to school. So then they actually do all that to get into the door. Oh, but by the way, if they leave that shelter, they don't know where their home is that next day. Do they go back to that same shelter? They go somewhere else. And then we expect them then to open the classroom and learn calculus or Shakespeare or Catcher in the Rye. Like, how was that even possible for them to concentrate when there's so many other issues impacting them? So I'm thinking about now the teacher through our conversation about all this policy dynamic they're now exposed to, the vilification to what you're talked about, the extra expenses of the PPP that is needed for them. Emotionally, for them to even get into the classroom, they're exhausted. Then they'll be asked to perform this Herculean effort of having to teach in the classroom. How are you guys, addressing that part for teachers, to make sure they can be at their best? Because at the end of the day, yes, teachers are heroes, but they're human, right? And so, like, how are we reconciling that? That's hard, and to be at your best and already a challenging job prior to COVID.
So, Mike, what you've just laid out are the compounding inequities that are built into every social system in this society. We have for decades known that we have underfunded our schools, particularly in our communities of color. We have known for decades that our students and parents and families were in communities that where we had disinvested. We have known for decades that our students were living in food deserts. We've known that forever. And the question that we're facing as a society now is not whether we have the wealth, it's whether we have the will to do something about that reality. And teachers and other educators who are at the center of that, understanding that they are teaching the whole student. And so they cannot only concern themselves with the academic learning, they have to concern themselves with social and emotional learning. They have to know that their students' bellies are full. They have to know that they're getting adequate, affordable healthcare. They have to know that they have a place to live and they feel safe. And so that's why we're talking about safe and just and equitable schools, because it is going to take all of those systems that impact our students to change and to deal finally with those inequities that are based on institutional racism and are based on economic injustice that have existed in our society forever. And those are the kinds of things that we at the NEA are taking on front and center. You've heard me talk about the vision that I've laid out for members, which is to reclaim public education as a common good and then transform it into something like it was never actually designed to be. And that is a racially and socially just and equitable system that prepares every student, every single one, to succeed in this rapidly diverse and interdependent world. And so that is what we are focused on. And that's the work that we are not only doing internally at NEA. We are not only uniting our members, but we are intending to unite the entire nation to do that.
And in closing, I want to get your thoughts in terms of how are you guys grappling with this over the summer or prior to opening up the school year. In an op-ed that I wrote, I talked about this study from McKinsey where they said, and I'm going to quote here, estimates project that even returning to classroom, this is for Black and Brown Indigenous communities, the dangers are estimates project that even returning to classroom learning in early 2021, Black students could fall behind more than 10 months of academic progress, and Hispanic students by more than 9 months, and low-income students by more than a year, not because they don't want to log into remote learning platforms, because they're just unable to. Are you guys thinking about that as we now are here in September?
So we've already started to work on that very issue, Mike, and it's why we work so hard over the spring and the summer to extend learning opportunities for, especially for those populations of students, not only our students of color, not only our students living in disability, but also living in poverty, but also our students with disability who have suffered greatly during this pandemic. And so we've worked on is creating those extended learning opportunities to actually use the funding from the American Rescue Plan to do that throughout the summer and to continue those extended learning opportunities through the fall and through this entire next year. And then what we're focused on and what we call deeper learning. What we now know is the science of learning, how the brain actually operates to incorporate the social, emotional, and academic learning in a way that it can accelerate the learning for our students, which is what we need to do. We absolutely have to begin by diagnosing where they are in every way, so we understand where the gaps are, and that we can, with a laser focus, actually not only provide the resources, but we have to provide the additional support. We have to have the additional professionals. We have to continue our learning as educators so that we can address the issues that you just raised. So that's the work that we are doing, not only by ourselves, but in partnership with others to, you hear a lot of people talk, I think you said it too, we all say it, when will we be back to normal? Honestly, for our students who have been marginalized forever, it can't go back to what it was. We have to do better. We have got to deal with these systemic inequities. And that's exactly what we are doing and plan to do, because we understand that it has to be our shared responsibility to ensure that every student, everyone can live into their brilliance.
I love that. Becky, Pringle, thank you so much for your advocacy. Thank you so much for all that your members meaning teachers, do for our students across the country. As someone who was a high-performing academic student, K through 12, and someone who was a highly engaged student, extracurricular activities and leadership and marching band. I am someone who went to school not for AP Calculus or AP Chemistry and AP English, and great classes, wonderful teachers I had. Shout out to Mama Lynn, shout out to Mr. Ginther, Miss Ginther, and all my teachers. I'll get in trouble if I start naming all my teachers, but I actually, they still follow me. So shout out to all of them. Everett High School, you guys are amazing. I love you. But really, Mr. Hartley, I got to shout you out. Mr. Hicks, I got to shout you out. I just get in trouble. Susan Lane, I got to shout you out. But I went, Becky, for the extracurricular, right? Like going to marching band got me out of bed. Knowing I was going to have jazz band during fourth period got me out of bed. Knowing I was going to have a yearbook class got me out of bed, right? And knowing I was class president, I had meetings, that got me out of bed. AP Chemistry didn't. And so I think that we have to be honest with the conversation, the importance of school and community and the faculty to be able to have those resources to aid and being supplemental to the conversation is so important. I'm so happy school is back in session, and I pray that it's all able to be worked out and they can do it. Thank you, Becky.
Oh, Mike, thank you so much for giving all those shout outs and for all those you missed. You just brought a smile to my face. And I know you brought a smile to the faces of not only your educators, but all educators by lifting them up. Please continue to do that. And follow me on my Joy and Justice and Excellence tour, where I'm going to be lifting up those incredible educators and shining the light on what they do and what they need from all of us, and ensuring that our students and educators experience that joy of teaching and learning, that we fight for that education justice, and that we always aim for excellence. Thank you so much.
God bless you, Becky. You're welcome here anytime. Have a good day, my friend.
Thanks, Mike.